I think if we're to teach our sons to be feminists, if we're to teach equality, if we're to understand what poisons the well in men, that what creates toxic masculinity, we need to understand and look under the hood of characters like Phil Burbank to see what their struggle is and why that's there in the first place, because otherwise it will just keep repeating itself. You know, you've got to jump in the middle with any character you play. I'm 45. I can't remember how old you are, Donnie. You look a lot younger than me, but it's you have to bring some life experience and lived life to a character, no matter where a story begins. So I think from that, you then build an empathy and an understanding for why the action and the trajectory of decisions and choices and everything that then unfolds within that 2-hour story span, which in our case is a linear narrative, happens. And it's all the work you do on the person that you don't meet off screen before the first page of the novel or the script. That's the stuff that kind of you want to bring as the subtext, or just a knowledge of that character. So it always feels like you're jumping in the middle. And yeah, I think you see enough in Phil's example of a man who you see him, straining to have something like normalcy, something like the routine or what is expected to happen in that moment. He's a very controlling character. So you realize through his petulance at things not being under his control and circumstances being different to what he'd imagined them or wanted them to be, that there's something deeply damaged about this volatile, angry man, something that's not being satisfied.
I completely agree with Benedict. You know, a lot of the work as actors we've done before that. I am a little bit older than you. I'm 48. So you know, you've done a lot of that work previously, and especially particularly with this story. As soon as we meet Andy, he's already saying sorry. He's already apologizing, which I think was very, that was a really clever decision that we made straight away. As soon as we meet him and we're with him on this journey for an hour and 10, 15, 20 minutes, immediately he's starting off by saying sorry. And for this particular story, it's in the title. It's a man at a boiling point. Everything's just collapsed. Everything's falling away from what he's had. You know what I mean? You can see he must have had a good life. He has been successful, but now because of his addiction and his demons and his own fear and self-loathing, it's just slowly falling away from him. And you get to see, in that sense, the masculinity. I suppose, you see, I had a backstory where it was kind of issues with his father and stuff. So it's him trying not to be what his father was, but his father was an alcoholic. So for him, it's always been a part of his DNA. It's been there since he was a young boy. And to watch that kind of the upbringing that he must have had, and he's trying his hardest not to be like that with his son. And then eventually you end up creating the same mistakes that you've seen. Do you know what I mean? That kind of indoctrinated background that he's come from. But then it's just, as soon as we begin with this film as well, it was 90% improvised over the process. So everybody else is on that same page as me with the created character that we've all got, and then you just throw it all up in the air and we play. We have the structure of it, like what Benedict said. It's the story, it's the structure that's within that story. But then we all improvise, and then you're just one big moving machine, I suppose, in a way. Do you know what I mean?
I think you sound like you had a tougher gig in the sense, but I mean, very enjoyable to create that from scratch. I was working off this incredible blueprint of a book. So within that, there are massive amounts of flashbacks and incredible insights into who this character was as a child, how his parents treated him and what they expected of him, and the kind of pressure of conformity that was there very early in his life that he pushes against again and again in the film, and makes him the person we meet in the beginning frames of it. And I think it's all the kind of notepad work. Well, a lot of it was done through that. There's one key relationship with his real father figure, which you talking about your dad made me, your character's dad made me think of, which is Bronco Henry. And that's really a pivotal relationship in this man's life. Someone he was in love with and had a relationship with, as well as him being his mentor and tutor, but huge age gap. And he was 19 when he saw him trampled to death in a corral. So that for me kind of keyed into that sense of arrested development that results in this sort of this anger in this man, this masculinity, this need to prove himself as something other than this true, I guess, authentic self, which is a man who's loved another man and doesn't know where to place that in the world and the time he lives in and the culture he's in, but also within himself and his own body. He can only really associate that with something that's very deep and private in moments in the film where he's away from everybody else. I think if we're to teach our sons to be feminists, if we're to teach equality, if we're to understand what poisons the well in men, that what creates toxic masculinity, we need to understand and look under the hood of characters like Phil Burbank to see what their struggle is and why that's there in the first place, because otherwise it will just keep repeating itself. And while we're thankfully moving into a space now where survivors are being heard and supported and protected, we've got a way to go on that still, don't get me wrong, but I think we also really have to look at the root cause of the behavior that these people have suffered from. And this man, trying very hard not to say anything about a very odd reaction that happened the other day on a radio podcast over here, without meaning to sort of stir over the ashes of that. I won't get into the details of it. If it's hit the news at home, it has here. But someone really took offense to, I haven't heard it, so it's unfair really for me to comment in detail on it, but really took offense to the West being portrayed in this way. And beyond that reaction, that sort of denial that anybody could have any other than a heteronormative existence because of what they do for a living or where they're born, there's also a massive intolerance within the world at large towards homosexuality still, towards an acceptance of the other, of any kind of difference. And no more so, I guess, in this prism of conformity, in the sense of what is expected of a man in the sort of the Western archetype mold of masculinity. And so I think to deconstruct that through Phil, to look at that, it's not a history lesson. And I mean, need we look much further than what is going on in Russia at the moment to understand that somewhere in the mind-boggling idiocy of that man's megalomania is some damage. There's some damage there, and we saw it in a president of the country that's hosting me at the moment. Though, you know, these people still exist in our world, and whether it's on our doorstep or whether it's down the road or whether it's someone we meet in a bar or a pub or I don't know, in a sport, on the sports field, there is aggression and anger and frustration and an inability to control or know who you are in that moment that causes damage to that person. And as we know far more openly now, as I was saying, damage to others around them. I think that's one of the great things we get to do as storytellers in culture, is to be able to siphon it into metaphor, to sort of let the light, you know, peek through the crack a little bit, and just hopefully it might touch someone or ignite a conversation about it that might reach someone like that. It's much harder to go out and kind of billboard that as a problem because of course the massive aggression and defensiveness you'll meet with that, as well as the fist or the weapon or whatever it might be. Yeah, it doesn't necessarily find a good space and a time to be aired in everyday life. And I think that's why art and storytelling of any kind, whether it's a song lyric or you know, someone speaking of their own experience, a lived experience, or whether it's a piece of art or poetry or film, could sometimes do that.
Look, I know a lot of it is entertainment, and don't get me wrong, some of the stuff we do is entertaining massively, hopefully. But then occasionally you are allowed to either, you know, be seen on screen or even more appropriately come through that little empathy box that's in the middle of everyone's living room. And if you can penetrate through that, and like Benedict said, if you can cause some kind of discussion or throw something up for debate, which breaks the normal of what may normally happen in that household, or you create a platform for someone to go, Mum, do you know what? Or Dad, I was just, can we, if you create that atmosphere, then you know, look, to me, that's a gift. That's a hell of a gift. And to be able to be in a position where we can put a mirror up to society and say, let's have a look at ourselves here for a second, you know, be it in whatever format that may be. Let's just take a little look at us for a second and see how we conduct with our fellow man. Do you know what I mean? And see, are we kind? Are we being sincere? Or where are our motives from? I think to be in that position is a huge privilege and a huge honor for me. Just for me in particular, do you know what I mean? To be able to go down that road of being an actor, a young lad that wanted to act and getting on a bus and going to the Everyman Youth Theatres, you know what I mean? For me, that was a wonderful opportunity. And to meet lots of like-minded people, do you know what I mean? That was where I got to meet kids with posh accents, kids who had purple hair and listened to Morrissey, whereas I was just a breakdancer who had a nice pair of Adidas trainees. But, you know, that was where we all got to have our place to come and meet like-minded people and to be a part of these stories and to take what we've learned there back into our households and back into our friendship groups. For me, it was imperative in forming the man who I am today. Do you know what I mean? It really was. And hopefully what Benedict, I completely agree what he was saying with that kind of, it gives us that experience to be able to create this place for our children to try and raise the children to the best of our ability. Do you know what I mean? But give them a platform to be these rounded, honest, decent, pure individuals. Do you know what I mean? And for me, it's integral, and it really is. I feel so blessed to be able to do what I do,